to Designed and Delivered for Destiny. This week, we are going to be talking about family again. I'm going to be continuing the series. And I just thought it would be good for us to go a little bit deeper into some of the things that we oftentimes have to deal with in family. What are the things that impact us from our experiences with our family? I'm sure you've heard of the saying that family is like a love gym. I'm sure you've heard that saying before, right? And why do people say that? Because it truly is the first place where you develop the muscle to begin to know how to love imperfect people. You know, if you think about it, we go to the gym to improve some aspects of our bodies. We, put ourselves through all these endless repetitions and all these exhausting cycles, and we just allow ourselves to be pushed beyond our limits. And as we do that, we celebrate the progress, but we're not always looking forward to the process, but we know what's necessary to get the results that we want, right? We're looking to get those health benefits that come from going through that process, right? So we end up kind of like pushing through and persevering through that kind of daunting process. Now, in listening to me just say all those things, you'll probably be like, yeah, yep, that's exactly what we do. And you know what, as I was saying that, it sounded really good. But the fact of the matter is, the truth is, that is a lie for most people, right? Most of us drop out of our exercise routine well in the middle of going through whatever process we signed up for. A lot of times we're not necessarily always pushing ourselves as much as we can, even when we are doing it. Some people have no interest in exercising whatsoever, right? So that's kind of more of a reality for the majority of people. So if you find that this kind of latter description fits you, that's okay. It's no worries. You are not alone. There's many of us who struggle with this idea of having to exercise. So what is this about? This isn't about trying to get you to start exercising and things of that nature. But to at least consider the fact that oftentimes we will put ourselves through some very daunting and redundant and exhausting processes because of the value that's going to come out of it. And, there is this sense of freedom that we feel when we have the liberty to make our own choices about what we value, what's important to us, what we want for ourselves. And what's interesting is when it comes to the family you're born into, you did not have that choice. There was no opting out or canceling midway through. You had to go through the endless repetitions and cycles of being pushed sometimes beyond your limits. And the difference is that, in family, you might be doing all the same things that all those great gym goers are doing to get results. But in family, there are times where you may not actually see growth. You're progressing, but not always forward. In fact, some people, because of family, they actually become stuck, right? They'll become emotionally stuck in their developmental process, and it becomes arrested, right? We call that arrested development. So even though they get older, they're still emotionally stuck at that same age. So again, we know that for the most part, when you go to that gym, that's going to typically produce the intended results that you're going there for. But it's evident that the love gym that is rooted in family, it does not always give us that same guarantee. So why then did God entrust his children to learn how to love and how to think and behave like him through broken and imperfect people? Well, what other choice did he have? Just kidding. I think it's much deeper than that. If we try to answer that question from our vantage point, a lot of times we're seeing the beauty in something when it's already put together nicely and it kind of appeals to our senses. It makes sense from what we're picking up on. We're kind of wired to see first, then believe. But because God has completed everything that he is going to do and he knows the end before the beginning, he knew us before he even sent us here. He knew that something beautiful would be birthed through the chaotic, the unpredictable, the imperfect circumstances that comes with family. He knew the impact that every scar that we would receive would have on us in terms of transforming our hearts and our minds. You see, using this analogy of the gym, we tend to use machines and weights and all these bands to mold and shape our physical bodies. Schools will use books and words and experiments to shape our minds. On the other hand, God's tools to mold and transform us, to perfect us, consist of everything and everyone operating around us at any given time. This means that to God, negative and painful situations we've gone through are actually a tool that He can use. And this is difficult to digest, because yes, we trust that God knows what He's doing, but naturally we are programmed that pain is bad. Avoid it at all costs. Do whatever it takes to not have to go through challenging situations. Yet to God, pain is a currency that produces desired results. Can you imagine that in Isaiah 53:10, that it pleased God to bruise Christ? And so for believers, I guess it's fair to say that pain and suffering, it's to be valued, dare I say, to be even celebrated. This isn't my idea. I think this is kind of absurd, but actually it's the Word of God. The Bible tells us in Romans 5:3-5 to rejoice in suffering, aka celebrates. Why? Because it produces endurance and character. And I know you're thinking like, yeah, but it also produces pain, right? And that's true. But through God's eyes, He's focused on the endurance that's being worked out in you, the character development that is taking place. So to God, pain produces fruit in your life. It's not a bad thing. It's actually to Him a very necessary and important part of your developmental process. It's interesting, right? Because when we're in pain, oftentimes we're counting the cost that we had to pay physically, emotionally, and maybe even financially. Whereas God is just adding up all the benefits of how that season of suffering is just building you up. Even though when you look at it with your physical eyes, you don't see something being built, you feel like something is actually being broken. So when you came into this world, into your imperfect family, why did He allow those things to happen? Why did you have to be around chaos or live in fear or, experience so much trauma? It's not because something was wrong with you. It's not because it's something that you deserved. But for one, it's because we live in a broken world. And so the worst things happen when there is brokenness. If something is broken, it doesn't function properly, or it may not even function at all. Imagine using something broken for the rest of your life. How frustrating would that be? Well, that's the world you live in. We minimize this truth, but we are existing in a broken system, meaning it does not work the way that it was designed to. Now, there are many great things that we can say about this world, but in reality, there is a brokenness that we have to embrace, because when we do, we then remember that this world is not our home. This is temporary. We are here for a very short time. Then we will experience the perfect world that our soul yearns for. So I encourage you that as you engage with the brokenness of this world and the brokenness within people, to start embracing it instead of continuously getting frustrated. If you know a storm is coming, you don't just sit and complain. You prepare and do what is necessary to make it through the storm. How can we shift our expectations of family to embrace the storms until they pass? How can we teach children that challenges are necessary and give them the skills and knowledge to overcome them, instead of just allowing them to have to figure it all out on their own? Imagine, a storm is coming and you're doing everything you need to do to get ready and to prepare. All the while, you're allowing your child to just stay outside and figure it out on their own. This is what has happened for so many generations of children. They were left emotionally and psychologically to figure out how to navigate the storms of life on their own. And yes, even though they were left, they weren't technically alone, because there's always a spiritual presence with someone, especially when there are storms. And we thank God for, guardian angels, but we also have to know that angels are not the only beings that have access to children. Many doors can be opened through various means before, during, or after the storm that will allow other spirits to enter their life. It's not a coincidence that the mental health of each generation has continued to worsen, that body and gender issues have increased, and identity and sexual confusion is on the rise. Too many children have been left spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically left without a true covering. And this leads me to this question. Since we know that God allows some suffering because he knows that it's necessary to build up something in you, is it possible that some suffering wasn't necessary for our growth process, but we still went through it because of choices that were made? I think so. I don't believe Jonah had to die and spend 3 days in the belly of a whale. I believe that was due to a choice that he made, and God in his mercy made a way for him to survive. I don't believe that a mom was supposed to endure having her baby die, but David made a choice from a place of selfishness, and the consequence of that choice was the death of their newborn child. Some pain we inflict on ourselves, but even that is rooted in brokenness. Broken people deceive themselves into thinking that they have the answers outside of God. Broken people look to external things as their source to survive. Broken people do things from a place of selfishness and pride. And this all impacts the reason why you experience what you experienced in your family's love gym. Can you imagine being a descendant of Ham 5 generations later, and they still had to deal with the family curse that they had nothing to do with? So what that sounds to me like is that if one of your great grandparents made poor choices, the consequences of their choices may still be impacting you today, and you don't even know that, joker. And I find that incredible. The complexity of family is so deep and rich with layers on layers and layers. So are there challenges that you are paying for today because of the sins of your fathers and his fathers and his father? And does God want you to suffer these things? No. However, things remain until they are addressed, and until someone in the family bloodline addresses those things, they will continue to affect you. Think about the patterns in your family. Just take a second. Are there issues in relationships, early death, sickness, obesity, poverty, divorce, sibling conflict, mental health issues? What are the patterns in your family? Because every family has them, right? And even more importantly, what patterns have been passed down to you? Because if you can identify it, then you can do something about it. Now, last week we talked about what doesn't die in our family is transferred. So yes, those decisions that you made before you became sold out for Christ, that will still impact future generations and the lives of those around you unless you address it. In fact, depending on how long ago that door was open, many other things have likely entered you or come into your atmosphere, but you're just thinking that you keep having those thoughts and those desires because of an issue in your marriage or at work. You're thinking that you're having those health issues because of something in your DNA. No, something is going on, and the question is, are you going to get to the root of the issue and begin to fight back, or are you going to do whatever it takes to survive and just go with whatever life throws your way? If it's not clear yet, part of what God has sent me to do is to get people to wake up and begin to shift your mindset and approach life so that you can experience a higher level of living, a life of emotional, physical, and spiritual abundance. You've been praying for 20 years, but spiritually, you're still sleeping. Many of us have been asleep, especially in the Western world. All the while, we're going through all the motions of doing all the religious things and checking off all the Jesus-approved boxes. Yet, we are not representing our living God as a God of solutions, healing, deliverance, wisdom, and love to the rest of the world. How does all this connect back to your family and the challenges that we face within family? Well, if family is the first place where you learned how to love imperfect people, then how you learn to love them will determine if you were influenced by the ruler of this world or the mind of Christ. And this is important to uncover, because if your mindset was molded by the world's, then you are being led not by the one that you worship on Sunday mornings, but by what's been programmed into you. What does this look like? Well, how do you approach, let's say being hurt or offended? Do you retaliate by getting the person back or by withdrawing your love and attention? Do you cut people off or remain connected but then just carry all this unforgiveness and these grudges? How about the most common one? Do you gossip about that person with your spouse or friends? A lot of times we'll start resenting a person and just, you're sitting by just waiting for that person to fail. And if you can identify with any of these, then your love gem that you experienced growing up may have opened the door for the wrong influences to enter your life. And it sounds like they are still with you today, or what they deposited in you is still remains. So the suffering or hard situation that you experience with your family, it opened a door, and because that door was not closed, even though the initial painful situation ended, you continue to suffer emotionally, physically, and or psychologically. Now, the question that you have to ask is whether the ongoing suffering is part of God's plan in some way. And I think that that's a great question to explore, because as much as you have to develop character through the suffering that we go through, what benefits do we actually receive when we go through spiritual battles? Are there any benefits? And this is now where we can begin to get to the crux of all this whole suffering stuff and, family talk. Because the bottom line to all of this and everything that you're going to hear me talk about today is that we are in this world, but we are not of this world, meaning that we are only passing through. The last time I traveled, right, I didn't pack luggage for the city that I was going to pass through, but for the final destination. I recently traveled to Nigeria, and we had a 2-hour layover in Virginia. And at the time, when I was traveling, the weather in Virginia was in the upper 60s, whereas the weather in Nigeria was going to be in the upper 90s. Can you imagine me investing all my time, my energy, and brain power into ensuring that I had the right outfits and, all the right coats and everything that I needed for my 2-hour layover in Virginia versus the 11 days that I was going to be in Nigeria? How ridiculous would that be? And I know some of you are thinking, well, it's good to pack just in case, because you just never know, and you may have had to stay in Virginia. Okay, Mom, just kidding. But really, I don't think that way. I know I'm going to make it to my destination, but I will always keep something in my carry-on luggage just in case something happens with my luggage. But many times we spend our mental energy, our emotions, our resources on this short time that we are going to be passing through this life, instead of investing in developing and building what we need for our permanent destination, eternity. And the way that I used to think of eternity is that, we'll have an eternity to figure it out, so we can just kind of work on that when we get there, and this is far from how God operates and thinks. He desires for us to focus on eternal things now. So back to that question, what are the spiritual benefits when we go through things within our families and in life? Well, we actually get to develop the spiritual tools that He designed for us to possess in this life as co-heirs with Christ. We become stronger spiritually. We can step into the authority that He has ordained for us in the spirit realm. We can demonstrate the same things that Christ demonstrated here on earth. The more that we grow, the less we have to deal with all these low-ranking spirits and devils that come against us. But when you are spiritually asleep, you are being victimized in more ways than you can imagine. So really, the love gem that you dealt with in your family, it was an opportunity for you to build and grow spiritually. Those moments of frustration or fear, loneliness, and doubt were an opportunity. And we know that many people didn't necessarily grow up in a Christian household, and some did, but they were only Christians by name. But learning some spiritual principles doesn't necessarily require you to be Christian. How so? Well, learning how to submit to authority, even when those in authority have issues, is a spiritual principle. Learning how to be obedient, how to forgive, how to give sacrificially, and to how to pursue wisdoms as you're going about making decisions. Those are all spiritual principles. And then for those of us who were taught, learning how to talk to God through prayer and fellowship with the Holy Spirit, those are all machines in the spirit realm. I gave you that list so that you can begin to recognize that today, when you choose to forgive, when you honor other people in your life, especially those in authority, when you are obedient to what God says, that not only builds you up in the spirit realm, but it also impacts how you will live in eternity. What we do in this life, it has a direct impact on how we will experience eternity. And some will say, listen, as long as I make it, that is enough. That mindset was programmed into you by a demon, okay? God is not a God of doing the least to get by. Tell me something. What about this world that He created? What about our physical bodies or anything that you see demonstrates that He supports doing the least to make it? So we have to do what it takes today, right now, in this life to prepare for the future. There are so many benefits to, making eternal investments now, not just for you, but also for your family. So just ask yourself, are you fostering a mindset that stems from a Christ-like way of doing things, navigating this life, or from programming that was passed down to you through the generations? Remember that everything that you've gone through and will go through, God promised that it will work together for your good. The suffering is but for a little while. The sacrifices of building spiritually both give you an immediate and eternal return. Don't waste the opportunities that you've had to endure pain and suffering by not reaping the benefits. There is greater and more that God is wanting for you to take hold of, but you have to go after it and possess it. By now, you should be flexing your spiritual muscles by demonstrating the power of God here on earth. But instead, too many of us are still asleep and distracted by this world. It is time for us to wake up. All right, you know what time it is. This is the time where we get to discuss a phrase, pattern, or belief that has been a hindrance to many in the culture. And if we eradicate it, it would improve your life, your family, and the community.
It's chain breaking time.
The pattern that we are addressing today is suffering without analysis. What does this mean? This means that you have been going through battle after battle, year after year, and not once have you sat down to assess the root cause of the issue. What impact is this situation having on my life, my heart, my mind, and those around me? All too often, our attention is on the situation at hand and just how to survive until it passes. But in doing so, you are suffering in vain. When you go through things, there is always something to gain from it. Until you know what that is, you've wasted your time, your energy, and resources just going through that situation and coming out of it. There is so much more to life than just making it through things. Any type of growth, overcoming, and victory requires for you to analyze. And when you do, trust God with what you discover and the insights that you receive. So analyze the struggles, the pain, the things that you are going through, and let's overcome differently from here on out. Let me close with a final word of encouragement. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. You serve a God who will turn your mourning into dancing and sorrows into joy. You serve a God that will give you beauty for ashes and a garment of praise. Victory is yours today. All you have to do is pursue. Until next time, shalom.